For years, the British public has watched the royal family smile for the cameras, even when the family behind those smiles was anything but simple. But this time, one tiny royal gesture may have exposed a much deeper problem: William and Catherine, Camilla, and a king caught between them. According to a claim made by royal commentator Ian Pelham Turner, William and Catherine allegedly failed to bow or curtsy to Queen Camilla, and that sounds like a tiny breach of etiquette. Until you understand WHO was involved. Because Camilla isn't simply Charles's wife, she is the queen. William isn't simply Charles's son, he is the heir to the throne. And Charles? He is the father standing between two generations of the monarchy. So if that moment really happened as described, was it simply an innocent oversight, or did it reveal a tension that the palace would rather keep private? There is no verified evidence proving that Charles was furious. There is no official palace statement confirming a family rift, and we should not pretend otherwise. But there is something far more intriguing. While this alleged snub was attracting attention, Charles was quietly doing something that could have enormous consequences for the family. He was reopening the door to Harry, and this time, Camilla was standing inside that door. So is Charles choosing Harry over William? Or was something much more complicated happening behind palace walls? Because once you understand what happened next, that single bowing controversy looks very different. And this particular moment comes at an extraordinary time. King Charles III is still dealing with the demands of his reign. William is preparing for a future that will eventually place the crown on his head. Catherine has become one of the most important figures in the next generation of the monarchy, and Queen Camilla occupies a unique position beside the king. She is his wife. She is queen. And she is also the woman whose place in the family has been complicated by decades of history. That history matters, because Camilla's relationship with William and Catherine cannot be understood simply by looking at one royal engagement. The roots go much deeper. Back to the marriage of Charles and Diana, back to the years when William was growing up, back to a time when the future king was not yet king at all, and the woman now called Queen Camilla was one of the most controversial figures in his parents' story. William was young when his parents' marriage collapsed. Harry was younger still, and when Princess Diana died in Paris in August of 1997, the brothers were left to carry an extraordinary burden. Their mother was gone. Their childhood had been changed forever, and the family history surrounding her death was still intensely emotional. Charles eventually married Camilla in April of 2005. The ceremony was quieter than the grand royal wedding many had once imagined for the heir to the throne, but it marked a decisive moment. Charles had chosen Camilla, and over the years, she became increasingly integrated into royal life. Eventually, she became queen. That transformation is one of the most remarkable chapters in modern royal history. The woman once viewed through the painful lens of Charles and Diana's marriage eventually stood beside Charles at his coronation. But public acceptance does not necessarily erase private history, and William had lived through that history himself. So when today's reports speak of tension between William, Catherine, and Camilla, the story immediately becomes bigger than a simple bow or curtsy. It touches old memories, old loyalties, and an entirely new question. Can the next generation fully embrace the king's wife while carrying memories of the family story that came before her? That is the question we need to examine, because the reported incident did not happen in isolation. It arrived during a period of extraordinary change within the royal family, and one recent event made the situation even more sensitive. Prince Harry. In July of 2026, Harry and Meghan reportedly met King Charles and Queen Camilla privately at Highgrove House. The meeting was significant. According to reports, it was carefully arranged and kept private. Charles wanted to see his younger son, and, importantly, he wanted to see his grandchildren, Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet, for a family that had spent years divided. That was a remarkable development, but there was a complication. William and Catherine were reportedly not informed in advance. That detail immediately raised questions. Was Charles simply acting as a father? Or was he sending a message to his heir? Some commentators went much further. They suggested William was furious. But again, that is a reported interpretation. It is not an established fact. And the distinction matters, because the royal family has become one of the easiest subjects in the world to turn speculation into apparent certainty. A private meeting becomes a feud. A missed appearance becomes a snub. A facial expression becomes anger, and a bow becomes a political statement. The truth can be much more complicated. Still, the timing is impossible to ignore. Charles had just reopened a door to Harry. At almost the same time, reports began circulating about tension involving William, Catherine, and Camilla, and suddenly, the old family fault lines appeared to be moving again. This is where the story becomes fascinating. Because William isn't simply Charles's eldest son, he is the heir. Every decision Charles makes around Harry, Camilla, and the future of the monarchy is therefore viewed through William's eventual reign. William knows that, Charles knows that, and Camilla knows it too. The question is, how does a father balance his relationship with one son against the expectations of the son who will eventually inherit everything? That question has followed Charles for years. And now it may be becoming even more difficult. Consider the position of Queen Camilla. She is not a newcomer to royal life. She has spent decades learning how to operate within the institution. She has supported Charles through years of public scrutiny. She has taken on an increasingly visible role since becoming queen, but she entered the family through one of its most painful chapters. That means her position is unlike almost anyone else's. She is accepted as queen. But her history with Charles is permanently linked to Diana, and Diana's memory remains enormously powerful, especially for William and Harry. This is why any perceived tension between Camilla and the princes attracts so much attention. It touches a wound that has never entirely disappeared from public consciousness. But there is another side to the story. William and Catherine are not simply private members of the family. They are the future king and queen. Their every gesture carries public meaning. When they attend an event, they are not merely attending as husband and wife. They are representing the future of the crown. That means their conduct is watched closely, perhaps too closely. And this is where the reported bowing incident becomes important. According to Ian Pelham Turner's claim, William and Catherine walked past Camilla without bowing or curtsying. He interpreted it as a public gesture of defiance. But there is no independent evidence establishing their intention. That is crucial. A missed bow does not automatically prove hostility. Royal engagements can be crowded. People move. Conversations overlap. Schedules change. And protocol itself is more nuanced than many social media posts suggest. Yet, if the gesture was deliberate, its meaning would be very different. Because formal respect between members of the royal family is not merely decorative, it reflects rank, position, and the hierarchy of the institution. And that hierarchy is about to become more complicated. Because William's position will eventually exceed Camilla's. When William becomes king, Camilla will no longer be queen. William will be the sovereign. Catherine will be queen. That future is already visible. And perhaps this is why every disagreement between the generations attracts so much attention. The older generation is still in charge. The younger generation is waiting. Charles stands at the center. Camilla stands beside him. William and Catherine stand behind them, but increasingly close to the institution's future. It is a delicate arrangement, and delicate arrangements can become unstable very quickly, especially when Harry suddenly reappears. For years, William and Harry's relationship has been one of the great unresolved stories of the modern monarchy. Harry left royal duties. He moved to America. He criticized the institution. He published his memoir. William remained inside. He continued preparing for the throne. The brothers became symbols of two completely different approaches to royal life. And now Charles has reopened communication with Harry. That alone would have been significant. But reports that the king has even considered welcoming Harry more warmly in Britain have added another layer. Some commentators have interpreted this as a challenge to William. Again, there is no official evidence that Charles intended it that way. But perception matters, especially inside a monarchy. If William believes the crown must move forward, and Charles believes the family must heal. The two priorities can collide, and then Camilla becomes part of the equation. Because Camilla has her own relationship with Harry. Harry has publicly criticized her. He has described her in deeply unflattering terms, yet the king has continued to stand beside his wife. That is hardly surprising. Charles's loyalty to Camilla has been one of the defining personal commitments of his adult life. So if Harry is welcomed back into Charles's personal orbit, what does that mean for Camilla? Would she be comfortable? Would Charles expect her to forgive? Would William accept it? These are questions that cannot be answered from public evidence, but they help explain why the current atmosphere attracts so much speculation. There is also a deeper historical issue. The royal family has always depended upon unity, not perfect unity, but visible unity. That distinction is vital. Members of the family can disagree. They can live separately. They can have very different opinions, but when they appear together, the expectation is that the crown looks stable. That is why a small act of etiquette can suddenly become a headline. The public isn't only watching William and Camilla, it is watching the institution, and perhaps Charles understands that better than anyone. He has spent his entire life watching private family matters become public questions. He knows what happens when royal disagreement becomes spectacle. He knows how quickly a family argument can become a constitutional problem, and he may therefore be particularly sensitive to anything that appears to weaken the appearance of unity. But there is an irony here. Charles may want his family to look united, while the family itself is going through enormous change. Harry is attempting to rebuild a relationship with his father. William is preparing for the throne. Catherine has returned to a major public role after her health difficulties. Camilla continues her duties as queen, and Charles himself is managing his health while remaining at the center of national life. This is not a quiet period for the monarchy. It is a transition, and transitions expose old tensions. They also create new alliances. That is why the alleged Camilla snub deserves attention, but not because it proves a royal war. It doesn't. It deserves attention because it raises a much more interesting question. What happens when the king wants reconciliation, but the future king wants boundaries? And what happens when the woman standing beside the king is at the center of that disagreement? The answer may lie in the past, because William has already shown, throughout his adult life, that he is protective of the people closest to him. He has been protective of Catherine. He has been protective of his children, and he has been increasingly protective of the institution he is preparing to inherit. That doesn't prove hostility toward Camilla, but it does tell us something about William's character. He has spent years watching the consequences of family conflict. He knows how damaging royal disagreements can become, and he may have no desire to repeat the past. But here comes the twist. Charles may see the situation differently. For him, the past may be something to heal. For William, it may be something to prevent from happening again. And those are not the same thing. That difference could become crucial, because if Harry's relationship with Charles continues to improve, William may eventually have to decide whether to accept his father's approach. And if Camilla remains central to that reconciliation, the old family story could return in a completely new form. Not Charles and Diana, not William and Harry, but Charles, Camilla, William, Catherine, and a son who is suddenly trying to come home. The royal family has been here before, a family divided by love, duty, loyalty, and the unforgiving gaze of the public. But this time, there is something different. Charles is no longer simply the prince waiting for his future. He is the king. William is no longer simply the younger generation. He is the heir. And Harry is no longer simply the spare. He is a prince living outside the institution, who may now be moving closer to his father again. So if William and Catherine really did appear to snub Camilla, the gesture may have been small. But the timing was anything but small, because behind that single moment stands a much bigger question. Who controls the future direction of the royal family? The king, the heir, or the family itself? And the answer may become clearer when we look at what happened next, because Charles's response to Harry's return may reveal far more about his relationship with William than any palace statement ever could. And that is where the story takes its most extraordinary turn. Because while William and Catherine were carrying out their own public duties, King Charles was quietly doing something that would have been almost unthinkable only a few years earlier. He was bringing Harry back into the family circle, not as a working royal, not as a returning prince, but as a son. And in July of 2026, that distinction suddenly became very real. Harry returned to Britain for engagements connected with his charitable work and the Invictus Games. For days, speculation surrounded one question: would he see his father? Then came the answer. Harry, Meghan, and their two children, Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet, were privately hosted by Charles and Queen Camilla at Highgrove House. It was the first time Charles had seen Archie and Lilibet since 2022. Buckingham Palace described it as a private family occasion. No photographs were released. No details of the conversation were officially provided. And that silence was significant, because this wasn't a royal engagement. It wasn't a public reconciliation. It was something much more personal. A grandfather seeing his grandchildren, a father seeing his son. And beside him, Camilla. That detail matters, because Camilla was not simply present at an ordinary family gathering. She was standing at the center of a relationship that had once been one of the most difficult in Harry's life. Harry had publicly criticized Camilla. He had discussed her in his memoir. He had described his complicated feelings about his father's second marriage. And yet, when Charles opened the door to Harry, Camilla was there. That alone tells us something. Not that every wound has healed. They haven't. Not that Harry and Camilla suddenly have a close relationship. There is no public evidence of that. But it does suggest something more restrained. A willingness to sit in the same room. And sometimes, that is where reconciliation begins. But then came the detail that sent royal watchers into overdrive. According to reporting by Vanity Fair's royal correspondent Katie Nicholl, William and Catherine were not told in advance that the Highgrove meeting was taking place. Other reports repeated the same claim. The meeting was kept extraordinarily private. Even senior members of the royal family were reportedly kept outside the circle. If true, that was a remarkable decision, because William isn't just Charles's eldest son. He is the Prince of Wales. He is the heir. And yet his father had chosen to handle the Harry meeting privately. Why? There are several possible explanations. And only one thing is certain. We don't know the king's private reasoning. It may have been about protecting Harry's privacy. It may have been about avoiding media attention. It may have been about preventing another family conversation from becoming a public spectacle. Or it may simply have been Charles acting as a father. But whichever explanation is correct, the secrecy changed the atmosphere, because William and Catherine were not at Highgrove. They were elsewhere, carrying out their own duties. And on the very same day, William was participating in a charity polo match at Windsor. The contrast was striking. One son was at Windsor, the other was at Highgrove, and Charles was in the middle. That image alone was enough to reignite the old question: had the king chosen Harry? Again, there is no evidence of a constitutional choice. William remained the heir. Harry remained outside the working monarchy. Nothing about the Highgrove meeting changed the succession, but emotional choices are different from constitutional ones. And this is where the story becomes much more interesting. Because perhaps Charles wasn't choosing Harry over William. Perhaps he was choosing privacy over palace politics. For years, Harry's relationship with his family had played out in public. Interviews, documentaries, books, court cases, statements. Every new development became another chapter in a very public family dispute. Charles may have realized something. If reconciliation was ever going to happen, it could not happen under the cameras. It needed privacy, and that may explain why the Highgrove meeting was handled so carefully. No photographers, no public schedule, no ceremonial welcome, no official photographs, just family and Camilla. But there was another reason the meeting mattered: Harry's children. For years, Archie and Lilibet had grown up thousands of miles away from their grandfather. Charles had seen them in 2022. Then years passed. That distance became part of the wider family divide, so when the children finally returned to Highgrove, the moment carried a meaning far beyond Harry. Charles wasn't simply reconnecting with a son, he was reconnecting with grandchildren, and that changes the emotional calculation. A grandfather may tolerate tensions between adults, because he doesn't want those tensions to define his relationship with the next generation. That may have been one reason the meeting mattered so much. But then, Camilla's presence adds another layer, because if Charles wanted a purely private reunion with Harry, why was Camilla there? According to reports, she made her way to Highgrove after being informed of the meeting. Some reporting described her as a source of support for Charles. That is plausible, but we must be careful. There is no public statement from Camilla saying what she thought about the reunion. There is no verified account of a private conversation between her and Harry, and there is no evidence that she demanded anything from either of them. What we can say is simpler. She was there, and that matters, because Camilla has remained beside Charles through some of the most difficult chapters of his reign. She was there when he became king. She was there at his coronation. She has supported him through his cancer treatment, and now, she was there when Harry returned. That creates an extraordinary picture. The king, the queen, the younger son, his wife, and 2 grandchildren, all together at Highgrove, while the future king was somewhere else. No wonder people started asking questions. But perhaps the most revealing part of the story was what happened afterwards. There was no dramatic royal statement, no announcement that Harry had returned to the family, no suggestion that he was becoming a working royal again. Quite the opposite. Harry remained a non-working member of the royal family. The Sussexes remained based in the United States. Their royal duties did not return. The constitutional position did not change. But something else did. The distance between Harry and his father appeared to narrow, and that may be more important than any title, because relationships are built one meeting at a time, and this was not just another meeting. It was the first time in years that Charles had seen both grandchildren together. That is difficult to dismiss as insignificant. But then, just when it seemed the family might be moving toward peace, another announcement changed everything. Harry and Meghan decided to spend much more time in Britain. The move was announced in August of 2026. After 6 years in America, the Sussexes were preparing for an extended return, not as working royals, not as residents of a royal palace, but as a family wanting to establish a stronger presence in Britain. Their children were expected to attend British schools. Harry planned to continue his charitable work, and the family would retain homes elsewhere. The decision was enormous, because Harry was no longer simply visiting, he was coming back, and that created a new reality for William. For years, Harry had been thousands of miles away. Now, he would be much closer. Suddenly, the family dispute was no longer happening across an ocean. It was happening in Britain, in the same country, near the same royal institutions, near the same family. And that changes the stakes, because distance can make conflict easier to manage. When people live thousands of miles apart, there is space, time, silence. But when they live in the same country, there are possibilities, unexpected meetings, family occasions, shared responsibilities, and perhaps reconciliation or confrontation. Nobody knows which. And there is another extraordinary detail. Reports said Charles had learned of Harry and Meghan's decision only days before it became public. If accurate, that means even the king may not have been controlling this next chapter. Harry was making his own decision. That is important, because it suggests the return wasn't simply a palace plan. It was a family decision coming from the Sussexes themselves. And that creates an entirely new dynamic. Charles may welcome Harry, but Harry is no longer waiting for royal permission to live in Britain. He is building his own life, on his own terms, and that could be both reassuring and unsettling, because William's future monarchy depends on clear boundaries. Harry's new life depends on independence. Those two visions can coexist, but they can also collide. And there is another person who sits directly between them, Catherine, the Princess of Wales. For years, Catherine and Harry appeared close. She had known him long before the marriage of Harry and Meghan. She had become part of the same family. There were years when the four younger royals, William, Catherine, Harry, and Meghan, appeared together in public. They were sometimes presented as the future of the monarchy, a new generation, a modern royal partnership. Then, everything changed. The closeness disappeared. The public appearances became rare. And eventually, the brothers stopped speaking regularly. That makes Catherine's position particularly interesting. She is not simply William's wife. She is also someone who once had a personal relationship with Harry. And now she is preparing for a future in which Harry may be physically much closer again. Would she welcome that? Would she remain cautious? Would she leave the decision entirely to William? We do not know. There is no verified public statement answering those questions, but one thing is clear. Catherine's position is inseparable from William's. They operate as a team, and that makes any future Harry reconciliation more complicated. Then there is Camilla. She too has a difficult history with Harry, but unlike William and Catherine, Camilla's relationship with Harry is connected to Charles himself. If Harry becomes closer to Charles, Camilla cannot simply be outside the picture. She is the king's wife, and she has become an important part of his private and public life. That is why the alleged William and Catherine snub becomes so intriguing. If the incident really happened as described, was it about Camilla? Was it about Harry? Was it about protocol? Or was it simply a moment that has been interpreted far beyond what actually happened? There is no confirmed answer, but the speculation reveals something important. The public is watching the relationships inside the royal family more closely than ever. And the reason is simple. The next reign is coming. Not today, not tomorrow, but eventually. Charles's reign is one chapter, William's will be another, and the people around William today will shape the atmosphere of that future. Catherine, their children, the wider royal family, and perhaps Harry. That last possibility is what makes this so uncomfortable, because Harry could return to Britain without returning to royal duty. He could remain independent. He could continue his charitable work. He could raise his children here and still maintain a relationship with his father. But what happens when family occasions begin to overlap? Christmas, birthdays, memorials, weddings, major anniversaries. What happens if Harry and William are suddenly expected to stand in the same room? What happens if Charles wants both sons beside him? What happens if Camilla is there too? And what happens if the old wounds have not disappeared? Those are the questions that no palace statement can answer, because this isn't really about protocol anymore. It's about trust. And trust may be the hardest thing for this family to rebuild. Harry has spoken publicly about his desire for reconciliation. Charles has now met him privately. Camilla was present. The grandchildren have been reunited with their grandfather, and the Sussexes are preparing to spend far more time in Britain. Those are facts. But whether William is ready to accept the new reality remains unknown, and perhaps that is why the alleged Camilla snub suddenly looks different. Maybe the most important event wasn't the bow. Maybe it wasn't the curtsy. Maybe it wasn't even Camilla. Maybe the real story was the changing balance inside the family. Charles is trying to heal. Harry is coming closer. William is preparing for the throne. Catherine stands beside him, and Camilla remains beside Charles. 4 adults, 4 different positions, 1 family. And the king stands in the middle. But there is one thing Charles cannot control. He cannot order his sons to forgive one another. He cannot command William to trust Harry. He cannot force Harry to forget the past. And he cannot rewrite Diana's place in their childhood. All he can do is leave the door open. Perhaps that is exactly what he is doing. But an open door can create hope. It can also create fear. Because once Harry is back in Britain, the question changes. It is no longer, will Harry return? He has. The question becomes, how close will he come? And if he comes close enough, he will eventually have to cross paths with William. Not in a television interview, not through a newspaper headline, not through a palace source. Face to face. Brother to brother. And that is the moment the royal family may truly discover whether this is the beginning of reconciliation or simply the beginning of another royal crisis. And that is where the real test begins. Because Harry's return to Britain changes the equation. For years, distance protected everyone. Harry was in California, William was in Windsor, Charles was at the center of the monarchy. Camilla stood beside him. The brothers could remain apart, and the institution could continue, but now Harry is coming back. Not for a weekend, not simply for a royal ceremony. He and Meghan are planning an extended return to Britain, with Archie and Lilibet expected to attend school there. The family is also expected to maintain a home in California, meaning this is not a formal return to royal duties. That distinction is absolutely crucial. Harry is not becoming a working royal again. There has been no announcement restoring him to official duties. There is no new royal role, no place on the official program, no constitutional change. But physically, he will be closer, much closer. And suddenly, the family cannot rely on an ocean to keep old tensions apart. That changes everything, because eventually, William and Harry may have to share the same room again, perhaps at a family occasion, perhaps at a private gathering, perhaps somewhere nobody expects. And if that happens, who stands beside Charles? Who stands beside Camilla? And who stands beside William? Those may sound like simple questions. They are not, because royal seating arrangements have always carried meaning. So have processions. So have greetings. So have who arrives first and who leaves first. The monarchy is built upon symbolism, and that is precisely why the alleged Camilla snub attracted so much attention. But there is something else we now know. On July the 10th, 2026, Charles and Camilla hosted Harry, Meghan, Archie, and Lilibet at Highgrove House. Buckingham Palace confirmed the private family meeting. It was the first known meeting between Charles and the entire Sussex family since 2022, and Camilla was there. That detail is impossible to ignore, because Harry's relationship with Camilla has never been simple. Yet there she was, beside Charles, at the reunion. No public confrontation, no dramatic announcement, no photographs released, just a private family meeting. And perhaps that tells us more than the headlines do, because if Charles wanted to rebuild his relationship with Harry, he wasn't doing it by pretending Camilla didn't exist. He was doing it with Camilla present. That matters. It suggests that any future relationship between Charles and Harry cannot simply erase the Queen. She is part of the King's life. She is part of the family. And she is part of the history Harry has struggled with. That makes reconciliation harder, but perhaps it also makes genuine reconciliation more meaningful, because forgiveness is easy when the difficult person isn't in the room. The real test comes when they are, and Camilla was. According to Vanity Fair, Charles was determined that the Highgrove reunion should remain private, and the Prince and Princess of Wales were reportedly not told beforehand. Now pause there, because that single detail creates an extraordinary picture. Charles knew, Camilla knew, Harry knew, Meghan knew, but William and Catherine reportedly did not. Was that a deliberate slight? There is no verified evidence that it was. Was it designed to embarrass William? Again, no evidence proves that. Could it have been simply because Charles wanted one private family meeting without the machinery of the wider royal family becoming involved? That is entirely possible, and perhaps that is the more sensible interpretation. But even a sensible decision can have consequences. William may not have been angry. We don't know. Catherine may not have been offended. We don't know. What we do know is that the meeting happened without them being informed in advance, according to reporting from royal correspondent Katie Nicholl. And that creates a fascinating question. Why keep the future king outside the room? Perhaps because the king wanted to keep the meeting completely personal. Perhaps because William's presence would have changed the atmosphere. Imagine it. Harry walks into Highgrove. William is there. The cameras are not, but the history is. Every argument, every interview, every sentence from Spare, every old wound, all of it sitting silently in the room. Perhaps Charles understood that. Perhaps he knew that Harry needed to see his father first, before seeing his brother. That would not be choosing Harry over William, it would be sequencing. One relationship at a time. First, father and son, then perhaps brothers, and that could be the real strategy behind the king's approach. Not a grand reconciliation. Not one dramatic family summit. Small steps, private steps, careful steps. Because Charles has already seen what happens when royal family disagreements become public. He has lived through decades of it. He knows that once a family argument becomes a national story, it becomes almost impossible to control, and Harry knows that too. After years of interviews and public revelations, the Highgrove meeting was different. There were no cameras, no photographs, no public account of what was said. The palace confirmed only that the family meeting took place. That restraint may have been deliberate, and if it was, it may be the most important development yet, because reconciliation cannot be performed for the cameras. It has to happen when nobody is watching. But then, there is William, and William's position is completely different. He isn't simply a brother waiting for an apology, he is the heir. He has spent years building his own public identity. He and Catherine have become the center of the monarchy's next generation. Their children represent the future. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, Prince Louis, and William knows that everything surrounding Harry eventually affects them too, not necessarily politically, emotionally. Family relationships have a habit of passing from one generation to another. Children notice, they remember, they ask questions, and one day, George may want to know why his father and uncle spent so many years apart. That future is already approaching. George is expected to begin at Eton College in September of 2026, following the educational path once taken by both William and Harry. Think about that for a moment. William went to Eton. Harry went to Eton. Now George is preparing to enter the same school. History repeating itself, but not quite in the same way, because George is growing up in a royal family that has already experienced a very public fracture. He will know that his father and uncle once stood together, then separated, and now Harry is coming back. That makes the future generation part of the story whether anyone wants them to be or not. But perhaps the most revealing part of the current situation is this. Harry and Meghan's return was apparently not entirely known to Charles in advance. Reports say the king was informed only days before the public announcement of their plans. That is extraordinary, because it means Charles may not be directing this return. He may simply be responding to it. Harry is making his own decisions. Meghan is making her own decisions. Their children are growing up. And Charles is being given the opportunity to reconnect with them. That changes the balance. For years, Harry was portrayed as the son who left. Now, he is the son who may be returning. But he is not returning as a royal employee. He is returning as an independent adult. That difference may actually make reconciliation easier, because Harry does not have to fit back into the old system. He doesn't need a desk at Buckingham Palace. He doesn't need a military appointment. He doesn't need to appear on the balcony. He can simply live in Britain and see his father, and perhaps see his brother. That is a much smaller request, but even small requests can carry enormous emotional weight, especially when the family has been divided for so long. And then we come back to Camilla. Because if Harry spends more time in Britain, he will inevitably encounter her more often. There may be family events, there may be private gatherings, there may be occasions involving Charles and the grandchildren. Camilla will almost certainly remain part of those environments. So the question is no longer whether Harry can reconcile with Charles while avoiding Camilla. The question is whether the family can move forward with Camilla included. And perhaps the Highgrove meeting gave us the first clue. She was there, not hidden, not absent, there beside Charles. That does not prove that Harry and Camilla have resolved their differences. It doesn't, but it demonstrates that contact is possible, and that matters, because every reconciliation begins with the possibility of another meeting, then another, then another. Trust doesn't arrive all at once. It accumulates, quietly, almost invisibly, and sometimes A family doesn't realize it is healing until years later. But there is another problem. The British public. Because Harry's return is not happening in a vacuum, people remember what he said. They remember the Oprah interview. They remember the Netflix documentary. They remember Spare. They remember his criticisms of the institution. They remember his disputes over security. And now, they are watching him return. Some will see reconciliation. Others will see contradiction. Some will welcome him. Others will remain deeply skeptical. And that public reaction matters because Harry is not simply returning to a private family. He is returning to a country where his relationship with the monarchy has been debated constantly. That makes his position extraordinarily difficult. He must rebuild family relationships, while also rebuilding public trust. Those are two completely different tasks, and one does not guarantee the other. But there is something else. Harry has not abandoned his independent life. He continues to pursue charitable work. The Invictus Games remain central to his public identity. He has built a life outside the royal institution. So this isn't really a return to the old Harry. It is a new Harry, coming back with a different set of priorities. And perhaps Charles understands that. Perhaps he isn't trying to bring his son back to the palace. Perhaps he simply wants his son back in his life. That is a very different goal. And if that is the king's intention, then William doesn't necessarily have to lose anything. The heir remains the heir. The monarchy remains intact. The succession remains unchanged. Harry remains outside the working institution, and Charles can still be his father. But there is one thing that could disrupt this delicate arrangement. Expectations. If Harry returns to Britain, people will expect photographs. They will expect meetings. They will expect William and Harry to reconcile. They will expect the family to appear together. And if those things don't happen, every absence will become another headline. Every missed occasion will be interpreted. Every expression will be analyzed. That is the danger. The family may be trying to heal privately, while the public demands proof. And perhaps the wisest thing Charles can do is refuse to provide it, because the moment reconciliation becomes a performance, it stops being reconciliation, it becomes public relations, and the royal family has had enough of that. But there is still the alleged Camilla snub, and here, we need to separate what is known from what is claimed. There is reporting from royal commentator Ian Pelham-Turner alleging that William and Catherine failed to bow or curtsy to Camilla, but that allegation does not establish what they intended. It does not prove that Charles was furious. And it does not prove that a family rift was caused by that moment. Those conclusions go beyond the evidence. Yet the story continues to attract attention, because people are looking for visible signs of the deeper tension. They want to know what the family really feels, and perhaps that is impossible to answer from a single gesture. A bow cannot explain years of family history. A missed curtsy cannot explain Harry's departure. A photograph cannot reveal what happens behind a closed door. And that may be the central lesson of this entire story. The most important royal decisions are often the ones we never see. The private phone call, the quiet invitation, the decision not to respond, the decision to wait, the decision to forgive. Those moments rarely make headlines, but they can change a family forever, and Charles appears to understand that. His meeting with Harry was private. His meeting with the grandchildren was private. The details were withheld. Even the people closest to the center of the monarchy were reportedly kept out of the loop. That is not the language of a public reconciliation. It is the language of something still fragile, something that needs protection, and perhaps that is exactly what it needs. Because there is one final question. What happens when the privacy ends? What happens when Harry's family is no longer thousands of miles away? What happens when William and Harry meet unexpectedly? What happens when George, Charlotte, and Louis are old enough to understand the family history? And what happens when Charles is no longer able to stand in the middle of it all? That last question is perhaps the most serious of all, because Charles is the bridge. He is the father. He is the king. He is the connection between two generations. But bridges do not last forever. Eventually, someone else has to cross, and William is the person who will inherit the other side. Harry may be coming home. Camilla remains beside Charles. Catherine stands beside William, and the next generation is growing up fast. The family has reached a crossroads, but the biggest confrontation may not be between Charles and William. It may not even be between William and Harry. It may be between the past and the future, because Charles wants to repair what has been broken. William wants to protect what must survive. Harry wants a relationship with his father, and Camilla has to remain part of the king's life while navigating a history that can never simply be erased. 4 people, 4 pressures, 1 family. And now, Harry is coming back. The question is no longer whether Charles will open the door. He already has. The question is, what happens when Harry walks through it and finds William standing on the other side? And that is the moment the entire story changes, because Harry is no longer simply the son who lives thousands of miles away. He is coming back to Britain, not as a working royal, not to resume official duties, but as a father, a husband, and a son who still has unfinished business with his own family. On August the 20th, 2026, it was confirmed that Prince Harry and Meghan are preparing to move back to Britain with Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet. Their children are expected to attend school in Britain. The family will live in a private, non-royal home, and they are expected to retain their American base as well. This is not a return to royal duty. It is something much more personal, and that distinction may be the key to understanding what happens next. Because Harry isn't asking to become the old Harry again. He isn't asking for a place on the royal balcony. He isn't asking to become a working prince. He is coming back, while remaining outside the working monarchy. That gives Charles something he hasn't had for years: the possibility of seeing his son, without having to bring him back into the institution. And perhaps that is exactly what makes reconciliation possible. But there is another question. What does William make of it? We don't know. There has been no public statement from William declaring that he opposes Harry's return. There has been no confirmed announcement of a new family arrangement, and there is no evidence that William has been forced to accept anything against his wishes. What we do know is that the brothers remain estranged, and that Harry's return places them physically closer than they have been for years. That changes the psychology of the situation. When Harry was in California, silence was easy. Now, silence becomes a choice. A birthday could bring them together. A family funeral could bring them together. A Christmas gathering could bring them together. Even a chance encounter could bring them together. And suddenly, the question isn't whether they will ever meet again. It is what they will do when they do. Because there is one thing distance can never provide: a second chance. You cannot have a private reconciliation with someone who is thousands of miles away. You need proximity. You need opportunity. And Harry is about to have both. That makes the Highgrove meeting even more significant. On July the 10th, 2026, Charles and Queen Camilla hosted Harry, Meghan, Archie, and Lilibet at Highgrove. It was the first known meeting between Charles and his grandchildren since the Platinum Jubilee in 2022. The palace described it as a private family occasion. No photographs were released. No detailed account of the conversation was given, and that silence may have been deliberate. The family was allowed to have a family moment, without turning it into a royal performance. Think about how different that is from the past. For years, almost every development involving Harry became public. The Oprah interview, the documentary, the memoir, the interviews, the legal battles, the statements, the counter-statements. The family dispute became part of popular culture. But Highgrove was different. There were no cameras waiting outside, no official photographs, no triumphant announcement, just a private meeting. And perhaps that tells us something about Charles. If he truly wants to rebuild the relationship, he may have realized that publicity is the enemy, because reconciliation cannot survive if every conversation becomes tomorrow's headline. Harry may need to trust his father. Charles may need to trust Harry, and neither can happen overnight. Trust grows slowly, sometimes painfully, one private conversation at a time. And there was another extraordinary detail. Camilla was there. The woman who has occupied such a complicated place in Harry's public story was sitting beside the king during this family reunion, that does not mean Harry and Camilla have suddenly become close. There is no evidence of that. It does not mean every disagreement has disappeared. It hasn't. But it does demonstrate something important. Harry can meet his father, with Camilla present. That may sound like a small detail. It isn't. Because if Harry's relationship with Charles is going to survive in the long term, Camilla cannot simply be removed from the picture. She is Charles's wife. She is queen. She is part of his daily life, and if Harry is genuinely trying to rebuild his relationship with his father, he will eventually have to find a way to exist peacefully alongside her. That doesn't require forgetting the past. It requires deciding what to do with it, and perhaps that is the real test. Not forgiveness, not affection, tolerance. Can people who have hurt one another share the same family space without reopening every old wound? That is much harder than shaking hands for the cameras. But there is another reason this matters. Charles is not getting younger. He has spent decades waiting for the crown. And now, as king, he is confronting the limits of time. His relationship with Harry cannot remain frozen forever. Neither can his relationship with William. Eventually, the next generation will inherit the consequences. William will become king. George will eventually become heir. Charlotte and Louis will grow into their own public roles. And Harry's children will grow up knowing that their grandfather was king of the United Kingdom. What kind of family relationship will they inherit? That question may matter more to Charles than any headline, because kingship is temporary. Family memory is not. A reign ends. A family story continues. And Charles knows that better than most. His own life has been shaped by decisions made decades before he became king. He knows what it means to inherit unfinished business. Perhaps he doesn't want his children to pass the same burden to theirs. That may explain why he has kept the door open, not because Harry is more important than William, but because Harry is still his son, and William is still his son too. That distinction is essential. The phrase, "Charles chose Harry over William," makes for a powerful headline, but the public evidence does not establish that Charles has chosen one son over the other. What the evidence does show is that Charles has maintained his constitutional relationship with William, while also making room for a personal relationship with Harry. Those are two different relationships, and a father is allowed to have both. The difficulty comes when those relationships collide. And that is where Camilla enters the story again, because Camilla is not simply the king's wife. She represents one of the most complicated chapters in William's childhood. William has publicly supported his father's marriage. He attended the civil ceremony in 2005. Over the years, he and Camilla have appeared together at major royal events. The family has moved forward. But moving forward does not mean pretending history never happened. And that is why the alleged snub involving William, Catherine, and Camilla must be treated carefully. The allegation has circulated, but there is no official palace confirmation establishing that William and Catherine deliberately snubbed Camilla. There is no verified evidence proving that Charles became furious because of it, and there is no evidence that one gesture created a royal family rift. That matters, because the most dramatic version of the story is not necessarily the most accurate version. Sometimes, the truth is quieter. A relationship can be complicated without being broken. A family can disagree without declaring war. A royal can miss a gesture without sending a secret message. And perhaps that is what happened. But even if the alleged incident was simply a moment of etiquette, the timing is fascinating. Harry is returning. Charles is rebuilding contact. Camilla is part of that process. William remains distant from Harry. Catherine remains beside William, and the future of the monarchy is moving steadily toward the next generation. That is the real story. Not one bow, not one curtsy, not one angry expression. The real story is the changing architecture of the royal family. For decades, Charles was the heir, William was the spare, Harry was the younger brother. Then the roles changed. Charles became king, William became Prince of Wales, Harry left royal duties, and now Harry is returning to Britain as a private member of the family. Everything has shifted, except one thing: the old wounds. Those have remained, and perhaps that is why the return is so emotionally powerful. because Harry isn't returning to the Britain he left. He is returning to a country where his father is king, his brother is heir, his stepmother is queen, and his nephews and niece are growing up under the weight of a future crown. He will be close enough to see them, close enough to hear about them, close enough, perhaps, to become part of their lives again. And that creates an extraordinary possibility. Archie and Lilibet could grow up knowing their cousins. George, Charlotte, and Louis could know their uncle's children. The next generation might have a relationship that the previous generation couldn't maintain. That would be a remarkable development, but it cannot be forced. And Charles cannot manufacture it. Neither can William, neither can Harry. Children create their own relationships, and perhaps that is where the greatest hope lies, away from the arguments of their parents, away from television interviews, away from newspaper columns, away from royal commentators. The younger generation may simply see one another as family, that is, if the adults allow them to. And that brings us back to William, because William is the man who will ultimately decide what kind of monarchy comes after Charles. He will not inherit his father's exact circumstances. He will inherit the consequences of them. He will inherit a monarchy that has experienced enormous public scrutiny. He will inherit a family with complicated relationships, and he will inherit a brother who now lives much closer to the center of his life. That does not mean Harry will become part of William's working monarchy. There is no evidence of that, but it does mean Harry may become harder to ignore, and perhaps that is exactly what Charles wants. Not Harry back in uniform, not Harry back on the balcony, not Harry back as a working royal, just Harry back in the family. There is something profoundly human about that. A father doesn't necessarily want his son back because of duty. He may simply want him back because he is his son, and Charles has spent years watching that relationship become increasingly distant. Now, there is a chance to change it. Not completely, not instantly, but enough. And perhaps Charles understands something that the public sometimes forgets. You don't repair a family by demanding that everyone forget what happened. You repair it by creating new memories, a private lunch, a family birthday, a conversation, a visit, a meeting with grandchildren, then another, then another. Eventually, the new memories begin to compete with the old ones. That is how time changes people, not by erasing history, by adding something new beside it. And maybe that is what Highgrove represented. Not a grand reconciliation, a beginning, a small beginning, but a beginning nevertheless. Yet one question remains. Can Harry rebuild his relationship with Charles without rebuilding his relationship with William? For now, the answer appears to be yes. A father and son can have their own relationship, but over time, the family cannot completely avoid the larger question. William and Harry are brothers. They are both sons of Charles. They are both sons of Diana, and their children are cousins. Eventually, their lives will overlap, perhaps at a wedding, perhaps at a funeral, perhaps at a major national occasion, or perhaps somewhere much more ordinary. The first real meeting after years of distance could happen without any cameras, and that moment could be more important than any public statement, because William will have to decide whether to remain behind the wall of the past or open a small door. Harry will face the same choice, and neither man can force the other. That is why the next chapter could be so different from everything that came before. There may be no explosive confrontation, no dramatic royal announcement, no extraordinary palace statement, just two brothers slowly deciding what they want the rest of their lives to look like. And perhaps Charles's greatest achievement as a father will not be choosing Harry, it will be making sure he doesn't have to, because a king can have an heir. A king can have a spare, but a father has two sons, and perhaps that is the distinction Charles has finally begun to understand. The monarchy demands hierarchy, family demands something else. It demands patience, it demands forgiveness, and sometimes it demands silence. The alleged Camilla snub may eventually disappear from the headlines. The speculation about Charles's anger may fade. Today's royal controversy will eventually be replaced by tomorrow's, but the larger question will remain. What kind of family will the next generation inherit? Will George grow up knowing Harry only through headlines? Will Archie and Lilibet grow up seeing William only at major royal occasions? Will Charlotte and Louis have a relationship with their cousins? Will Charles live long enough to see those relationships develop? Nobody knows. And anyone claiming certainty is simply guessing. But there is one thing we can say. The door is no longer completely closed. Harry is coming back to Britain. Charles has met him privately. Charles and Camilla have welcomed his family to Highgrove, and despite everything that has happened, the family connection remains. That doesn't mean the feud is over. It doesn't mean William and Harry are reconciled. It doesn't mean every wound has healed. It means something much smaller, and perhaps much more important. There is still a possibility that was once beginning to disappear. And sometimes, that is all a family needs. One possibility, one conversation, one invitation, one moment when nobody walks away. So perhaps the headline should never have been, Charles chose Harry over William. Perhaps the deeper story is this. Charles may be trying to make sure he never has to choose between the son who will inherit his crown and the son who lives outside it, between the queen standing beside him and the daughter-in-law standing beside his heir, between the history of his family and the future of it, because eventually, the king will have to leave the stage. William will take his place. Harry will still be Harry. Camilla's chapter will become part of history, and the grandchildren will inherit a story they did not create. When that day comes, the question won't be whether Charles was furious over a bow. It won't be whether one son received more attention than another. It won't even be whether Harry returned to Britain. The real question will be whether this generation managed to stop an old family fracture from becoming a permanent inheritance. And perhaps that is the most important thing Charles can still do. Not choose a son, not punish a son, not reward a son, but leave both doors open, long enough for his children to decide what happens next. Because crowns are inherited, titles are inherited, estates are inherited, but family wounds can be inherited too. And sometimes, the greatest legacy a father can leave his children is not a throne. It is the chance to make peace with the past. If you've made it this far, hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell for Royal Talks TV.